What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Once again, another still worth it video, and we're talking about none other than the legendary iPhone 6 Plus. Now, this phone has a lot to do with me personally, It was actually my first iPhone that I ever used as a main phone. I used iPhones as like iPods before, but the 6 Plus was the first iPhone that I owned as a main iPhone, and I can tell you, I was completely blown away back, I think in like 2016 when I started using it. At that time, it was crazy. I've never owned a phone like that before. That was like more of a flagship than it wasn't. And I was super happy. I would like cry myself to sleep every single day. But this phone has definitely aged very interestingly, and it's kind of funny because I think this phone is worth it more now than it was last year, but I'll get into that in a second. Now, starting off with the front, this thing has a 5.5 inch IPS panel. It is 1080p, and looking at the panels we have nowadays, it's not a great panel, it's not an OLED. It doesn't have like True Tone or really anything like that. However, it is still full HD, and I think this panel still has a lot going for it, even though it was released in 2014. I mean, this year it's going to be turning 6 years old, man. That's so crazy to say. So this panel, it's not a crazy thing, but if you're getting a 6 Plus, or if you have a 6 Plus, I don't think you're really getting it for the screen. I think you're getting it because, it's a cheap phone. So I don't really think a lot of people are going to be freaking out about that. You have quite a bit of bezel on the front, which is probably the thing that dates this thing the most. It's not an insane amount of, but actually it's pretty bad. But so many people, we've seen this in pop culture. We've seen this everywhere, this design everywhere. So people, when I look at this phone, I don't really think about like, oh, that's like an ugly looking phone. I just think of like, oh, that's an older iPhone. Like, I don't think like, oh my God, look how ugly it looks. I just think at that time, that's what we were using, I think that makes sense how I described it. I tried describing it in other videos too, but it's not really making much sense. So I'll probably delete that. On the bottom, we have a lightning port as well as a headphone jack, and those two things right there are things that really kind of future-proof this thing in a way. I mean, there's not a lot of phones that have headphone jacks nowadays. The 6 Plus, even though you have to buy it in the used market, has that capability, which is really cool. The lightning port is also a really nice touch. Thank God they switched from the iPhone 5. On the back, you can see aluminum build, it's pretty, and a single camera setup there too. And in terms of everything on the outside, it's pretty much how we expected it to be. It's not an ugly phone. I think it still looks pretty cool. It has, kind of an interesting design. I see this design so much when I'm walking around. People are still using like an iPhone 8 Plus, 7 Plus, 6S Plus, maybe 6 Plus here and there, but ultimately I think the design is one thing that either makes it or breaks it. When I hold it in my hand, I don't think I feel like I'm holding a used, cheap, old phone from 2014. I feel like I'm using like a budget phone of this year or whatever. Like, there's still a lot of budget phones that are coming out this year that don't feel as premium as this thing. So that's a testament to the iPhone 6 Plus. So in terms of the outside, like I stated, it's not an ugly looking thing, but it's definitely aging a little weirdly than some other phones from this time range. So let's move on to the software because it's getting awkward. This phone was released with iOS 8. We are able to upgrade it to iOS 12.4.4. Now, this is what's super interesting. We learned a lot from this software lifecycle, so I was pretty sure I made so many videos talking about this phone that it was not going to get iOS 13. It pretty much made no sense why Apple would do it, and this was before iOS 13 was released, and then eventually iOS 13 was out, and the 6 Plus did not get it, which I already kind of predicted because with the amount of specs and the amount of power this phone has, it wouldn't really make much sense for Apple to keep supporting it. However, Apple did do something super interesting. So instead of pushing full OS support that they usually do, so from iOS 12 to iOS 13, usually once the last version of iOS or the new version of iOS comes out, they usually stop supporting that older version. It doesn't happen every time. I think there's been some cases before, but it hasn't happened in a very long time. And Apple pushed, I think, 3 updates since iOS 13 has been out for iOS 12, and the iPhone 6 Plus is also included in that category, which is so crazy. So this phone still technically might be getting updates, it's probably not getting updates like how you're thinking, but it's actually a pretty decent thing, and I'm actually really, really happy that Apple is still supporting this phone. These aren't full OS updates, we're not getting features or anything like that, but the fact that Apple is still pushing updates for the iPhone 6 Plus means that not only the 6 Plus is still important to them and there's bugs that need to be fixed, but 2, there's still a lot of people who are using a 6 Plus. They have all the data to show how many people are using the 6, 6 Plus, 5S, those phones on iOS 12. So that means a lot of people are still using that phone. So if you own a 6 Plus, you're a trooper. If there's a huge issue with your phone, Apple might actually still support it and push an update for it, which is pretty crazy. Also, a side thing to note, the 6 Plus and the 6, but the 6 Plus, they kind of throw this together, were the best-selling iPhones of all time, and I think we're the best-selling phones of all time, or one of the best-selling phones of all time too, which is pretty insane. So the best-selling iPhone, that's a pretty huge feat, and there's a reason a lot of people bought it, and yeah, there was that infamous Bentgate issue, but as long as you kept a case on it, I mean, that's one thing that really hasn't aged well. I'll get into that in a second, but another huge thing about the software is the jailbreak that came out, the checkrain jailbreak, and this is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, and this is why I think this phone is probably worth it more now than last year. I think there was a jailbreak out for this phone last year at that time, but I think at that time there was definitely, but this jailbreak is bigger than that one last year, because you can literally be on any iOS version. You can be on iOS 12.4.4 or iOS 11 or whatever iOS version you want to be on, and you're able to jailbreak that specific version of OS. Any version of OS on the iPhone 6 Plus you can jailbreak, which is crazy. It's a hardware oversight from Apple, and that's a crazy thing. I mean, take it as you will, whether you want to jailbreak or not, at least you have that capability on this phone, which is really, really amazing. So in terms of software, that pretty much covers it. Now moving on to the performance side of things, this thing has the Apple A8 chip, a dual-core CPU, and there were 3 different models of the iPhone 6 Plus, a 16, 64, and 128GB model. All those models had 1GB of RAM. Now what I can tell you is that the performance on this phone is really not the best, especially for someone like me who uses an 11 Pro every day and has all these other iPhones that I test. The 6 Plus, even for a used iPhone, is pretty slow. However, what I will tell you is I don't think the performance is as bad as I thought, and what I mean by that is definitely when you load up an app, when you go and play a game or something, it definitely kind of shows its age here and there. It's definitely slow, but the consistency of this phone, and this is what I praise Apple for doing for their software is so basic that when you're flipping through the home screen and you're opening apps and all that stuff, it's still a pretty smooth experience, which is pretty crazy to say. I've owned even a Galaxy S7 or Galaxy S8, Galaxy S9, some of those phones over time, they definitely get bogged down with the more and more apps you put on them. There's so many background processes going on, and when you open an app or whenever you do anything with it, the choppiness of the animations, even my S10, when you open an app, the choppiness of opening that app is so crazy. My iPhone 6 Plus, I never really experienced that. Yeah, there's some glitchiness here and there. Of course, it's going to happen with this old of a phone, but it's really not as bad as you might expect. So performance-wise, when you have the app loaded and you're playing a game or whatever, really not that bad. I think it's actually pretty good for the price and the age of this phone, but even the price-wise, it hasn't depreciated that much. But for the age of this phone and for what it was at the time, it's definitely a slow phone, don't get me wrong, especially now, but it's not as bad as you might think. And I think you could probably, if you're not using, a ton of different apps in the background, because it only has 1GB of RAM, you can't really do much with that. And as long as you're not trying to, use Snapchat while you're on Instagram, this and that, I think you're going to be okay. You're going to have a very average performance life cycle, but I think you can get a way better experience from an iPhone 6s Plus. But the 6 Plus is whatever at the end of the day. So in performance, I'll claim it as very, very average nowadays in 2020. Moving on to the camera, this thing has a single 8-megapixel camera on the front and a 1.2-megapixel camera on the back. And quality-wise, I mean, I think the back camera is good enough. I think, there's nothing really screaming out to me that's still like a crazy camera. Even when it was released, it was very, very average. There's no crazy features, no portrait mode, no telephoto lens, no ultra-wide, no nothing like that. You can't even shoot 4K videos on it. And for a phone like this, I mean, like I've stated in other videos, for a lot of these older phones, they only have a single camera setup. So even if the photo quality and the video quality was great, you're still missing out on some of those hardware things that these new phones have, like the extra camera sensors and all that stuff. So quality-wise, I think it's okay. I wouldn't brag about it. I mean, it's pretty much what you expect, probably a little worse than what you expect, but it gets the job done. It takes the photos, but in terms of overall quality and everything, and the hardware features and everything, it's pretty lackluster, to be honest. Now moving on to one of the better things about this phone, this thing has almost a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. It's 2915 milliamp hours, and I think it's actually a pretty decent battery for this phone. It's not overpowered. The screen isn't a crazy 1440p OLED, whatever. PPI is very low, so ultimately I think the battery life on this phone still has held up pretty decently. However, this phone was released in 2014, so the battery has degraded since it's been released. So it's not at that full 2,915, it's probably at like 2,300 or even probably less than that. So that is one major thing to keep in mind. I think you can still get this phone batteries replaced at Apple, which is going to be really cool. This thing's charging like $80, which is going to be a waste of money because the phone doesn't even cost that. So you can go and just buy a new 6 Plus if you want to. Or a huge advantage of the iPhone 6 Plus is that parts are so cheap for this phone now. If you crack the screen, if you break the camera, or if you need a new battery, if you know how to fix a phone, which isn't even that hard to fix a 6 Plus, you can go and get the new parts on eBay, fix it up, and save yourself a ton of money. And I think that's one huge advantage for this phone. It doesn't cost like an arm and a leg to fix it. And to answer the question, is the iPhone 6 Plus still worth it in 2020? money? Well, there's different ways to look at this, okay? If you own the 6 Plus currently, I think you can probably wait until like, at least the SE2 comes out, which is going to be coming out in a couple months or even a couple weeks, I don't know. Or if you need a phone for like a week or two, I think you can, you're not going to die if you use this phone. However, what I will tell you is that for anybody out there who's even considering this phone, do not pick up an iPhone 6 Plus. Save some extra money, save like an extra $50 and go buy an iPhone 6s Plus in the used market. That is a much better deal. That thing is still getting software support and that thing is way faster. You can shoot 4K videos on it, Touch ID 2, all that cool stuff. The 6 Plus, it was good at its time. But nowadays, I don't want to recommend the 6 Plus anymore. The bend gate, all that stuff, it might be a cheap phone, but I'd rather you go pick up an iPhone 6s Plus. The 6 Plus, it is only worth it if you currently own it. For anyone else who's even looking for a new phone, I would highly recommend picking up an iPhone 6s Plus. So if you want to pick up an iPhone 6s Plus, eBay, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, wherever is probably the cheapest way to go. However, I will find the cheapest one on Amazon and link it down in the description below so you guys can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it would mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.